Hello, and welcome to the Over and Back Classic NBA podcast. I am Jason. With me, as usual, is Rich. Hello, Rich.
How's it going?
Well, it's going well. It's exciting times. Well, actually, not really that interesting of times, unfortunately, in the NBA season. A little bit of Dozeville, unfortunately.
But we have another league that's filled the gap for me. It did for the first week, and now less so. And that's, I think we should now explain it, because people have been kind of wondering, hey, where's Jason been? What's Jason doing? We always call you Jason, and we say Jason Mann or whatever, but you are actually Rashad McCants, who was the number one draft pick in the Big Three draft. So I'm happy that you've been able to find some time in the busy Big Three season to come here and talk to me for a little bit. So
yeah, well, I've managed to do a good job of hiding my identity, but you've revealed it into the world now, Rich. So I appreciate that. We probably should talk about this beforehand, but
I'm sorry. I just wanted people to know. I mean, we're nothing if not transparent on the show. So
it can be told now. So yes,
but I think from here on out, I'm still going to call you Jason, and we're just going to go on like that never happened. Like we'll just go on and we'll just pretend that you were never Rashad McCants of the Big Three, number one draft pick of the Big Three, former Timberwolf as well. We'll just forget from this point forward that it ever happened and go on being, just let you be Jason again, which is, I think, your most comfortable persona. So
I think that's fair, Rich. I think that's a good.
Okay.
I think it's a good plan. Thank you for giving me that out. So.
I apologize. I thought at some point we had to do it. So
at some point, I guess. Yeah, I guess it can be told. I am Rashad McCants.
If now, when? I mean, if not now, then when?
When? That's a good question. I guess this is perfect time. We're going to talk about the Big Three players in each franchise's history. So why not do it now? It seems like it's a good time.
Right. Have you had a chance to watch any Big Three yet, or no?
I have not. Okay,
so, well,
yeah, I feel like a traitor to the cause a little bit, but yeah, as you know, I have been going through this software development boot camp crazy thing that is taking up basically all my time. So I have not had a chance to delve into the Big Three like I would like, but perhaps hopefully the league has enough longevity that I can be able to watch it. Be able to watch it next year. So we'll see how it goes, I guess.
But our hypothetical Big Three that we're going to propose here in a minute, over the next few minutes, I think is going to be a far better league than the current Big Three. Not that I don't mind. I like this current Big Three, but it's sort of, after you've seen one game, it's kind of like, all right. Like, it's interesting. I still am enjoying it. I enjoy the nostalgia purposes of it. I enjoy seeing some of the old players or whatever. But yeah, I think all in all, it's fun. People that are trying to make more out of it than it is, I don't think it's necessarily, it really needs to be like examined all that much. I mean, it's fun. It is what it is. But yeah, this Big Three, this hypothetical Big Three that we're going to come up with, this new league, I think is going to work out a little bit better. I like the talent level in our Big Three more than the other Big Three. Yeah,
I would say that ours maybe slightly better than the Big Three. It's the talent pool they're working with. It's understandable, but
and certainly less Coutinho Mobley, I think, in our Big Three.
We consider Coutinho. I don't know, who would Coutinho be closest to in terms of Big Three? Clippers, Magic,
the Rockets, I'd imagine.
Oh, the Rockets. Yeah, I guess he. Well, yeah. But I think he might be further down the list, and there were more good Rockets than there have been good Clippers. So
I see what you're saying. Yes. Okay. I see. By that definition, maybe the Magic. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
We'll get to them. The Magic don't have a very storied past of guys that kind of hung around for a while.
Sure. Yeah. This Clippers had the Braves here, so and the recent CP3 success. So yeah. Magic has good runs, but yes. So anyway, yes. So our rule is player can only be used once. So Shaquille O'Neal could not be in the Big Three for the Lakers and Magic, let's say. So every player has to go once, which I think makes this a interesting exercise because there's certainly some arguable choices out there depending on who you want to get in and how you want to get them in. So we'll have a nice little fun debate to have here.
Yeah, I think that absolutely changes the whole dynamic of it, because then if you can use guys all the time, then yeah, it's like, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I can put him on the Lakers and the Bucks or whatever. But yeah, it's a lot more difficult if you can only put them in one place. Like a guy like Shaquille O'Neal, I mean, he could arguably be, in two different ones. And really, if you really want to make an argument, we'll talk about it in a little bit. Miami, you could almost make a case for him, on three different teams or whatever. But in this case, you can only put him for one. So I think then it makes it a little bit more interesting. Because yeah, I think if we just let everybody go at it would have been a lot easier than if we had kind of let this open. And there's a few teams that we're going to go through a little bit where it's like, man, that's really tough. And we, in some cases, when I chose my Big Three, I plucked a guy that would probably should have gone with franchise X or whatever and put him to franchise Y just because franchise Y did not have enough people or people that I thought was worthy. Whereas, franchise X maybe had other people, but this guy that might be synonymous with franchise X then got moved to franchise Y. So it was a fun exercise to do it that way where we can only use the player once, I thought.
Yeah. So let's get to it. We'll start with the New York Knicks, and this is sort of random order. We're starting with the older franchises and moving toward the more recent franchises. So the Knicks get to be first. For sure, I think on the list, Walt Frazier and Patrick Ewing. There's not really. Obviously Frazier was the most important player during their top years in the 70s, although there are some other very good players, Willis Reed included, and so on. But I think that, in terms of who was really the driving force between their greatness, I think Frazier was absolutely the key guy, although they had a well-rounded team. And then Patrick Ewing, has a lot of longevity records in the franchise history, most win shares for a Knick, leader of some teams that went to the finals and had some deep playoff runs, and probably their most famous period of success in terms of when fans were watching and all of that. But so I think those two. The third choice, it's a little bit tricky.
Yeah, I had a little trouble with it. There was three guys that probably about three guys that I thought that were worthy contenders. You have Charles Oakley, who I thought was a pretty interesting case that I didn't initially think of Charles Oakley, but then when you kind of go through the numbers and look at it a little bit, it's like, oh man, and that's a guy who was there for a long time and partially part of the identity of those 90 Knicks, a lot of ways. Ewing was the top guy, but the identity a lot of times came from a guy like a Charles Oakley, and he helped sort of define that team and their style and that sort of stuff as well. Harry Gallatin is another guy who I think you definitely have to consider. And then the last one that I did, and the one that I eventually did pick for my last of the big three, is Willis Reed. I thought when you add in the numbers, the little bit of the history, some other things like that, I just thought Willis Reed was then the best choice to kind of put on there. But it was a tough one. I thought Oakley and Gallatin all had reasonable cases here. But I went Ewing, Frazier, and Willis Reed. Yeah,
and Gallatin was the best player probably of those early 50s teams that went to 3 straight finals, and you didn't win a championship, but were very good. He was an Iron Man of his day and was an excellent player. On this, we're considering, as we generally do on this show, we're considering guys how they performed within their era. So the fact that a guy in the 50s couldn't really play today, we're not taking that into account here. We're just saying, okay, Harry Gallatin was great in the 50s and maybe better than Willis Reed was in the 70s. So maybe that would be the argument we would make, but I wouldn't make that argument. Reed was an MVP. Obviously, had a lot of great games. Won led them to 2 championships along with Frazier. I think he comes in slightly ahead of Gallatin. The career marks, they're actually fairly close, but I would give Reed slightly the edge. Oakley, it's an interesting case because he's more of a journeyman type player. I mean, he was really an important guy, but he's not a guy who was never a franchise guy like Ewing or Frazier or Reed were, but he was there for so long, and you wonder at what point do you reward like the just being the steady, longevity type guy as opposed to a guy who maybe had a shorter impact but was a more significant player overall. So
right. And one thing that's kind of interesting, and I guess we'll kind of talk about it here a little bit. In your mind, when you're building these teams, and I'm just kind of curious on what your thoughts were you building them for like a team that was like well-rounded, or were you just kind of going with, hey, these 3 guys are the best or represent the franchise the best? Or were you looking like, okay, well, we have 2 big men, let's get a guard in there, let's get, a forward, we have 2, guards or whatever. Were you doing any of that, or were you just thinking, okay, 3, these guys there? Because we didn't talk about our teams yet. We haven't really discussed who I picked or you picked or whatever.
Yeah, but we're doing this off the cuff here, so it makes it fun. Yeah, I would like to, if possible, have it be, kind of some balance of a guard, a forward, and a big man. But if that doesn't work out, I'm over. I'm not, not the end of the world, I would say. It's kind of my approach for it. So
yeah, that's good, because I did the same. There was a few guys that were pretty close, and I was like, well, this guy's kind of a guard, and we have a bunch of big men, so we'll get to that. But no, okay. I was just kind of curious on your thoughts for that. So there we go. We laid that out. We have both done that too, so we're good.
Yes. So next is the Golden State Warriors. The 2 that I had there were Steph Curry and Rick Barry, and I just think obviously Curry, is the linchpin behind their great success of recent years and 2 MVPs. I think he's a no-brainer at this point. Barry was led them to the 75 championship run. Was obviously an incredibly great, versatile player. Did play for a lot of other teams, which maybe knocks him down a little bit. He's not, even though he's best known for being part of the Warriors, he's not quite Mr. Warrior in the same way. A lot of guys who I think have good cases to be on there. Will Chamberlain would immediately stand out, of course, and I would pick him for this team if there were not perhaps better cases outside of it. Paul Arizin, another star of the 50s who led them to the championship in 1956. Neil Johnson, another great center, another one of the top players in the 50s, and both of them ranked pretty highly all time in win shares in franchise history. And then guys like Chris Mullin and Nate Thurmond. Mullin, of course, being one of the celebrated players, member of the Dream Team as well. And Nate Thurmond, who great player of the 60s and 70s, who led them to the finals and was a guy who replaced Wilt and did a pretty good job of it, averaged 17 rebounds and 17 points throughout his career with the Warriors. So a very one of the top big men of his day, considered one of the best defensive big men by a lot of the players he played against, including Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Yeah, this was a tough decision for me. Obviously, Curry and Barry were no-brainers. They had to go in there. But then the other ones were pretty tough. Chamberlain, I did not put him in because I thought he had better uses in other franchises, which we'll get to here in a second. And then I was really kind of torn on that third guy. So I had Paul Arizin, who was all around probably a better player than the guy that I chose. But I thought, for whatever reason, it just seemed like it seemed disingenuous not to have Nate Thurmond here because he played in more games with the franchise. And he seems more synonymous with the franchise, I think, a little bit more than Paul Arizin. That's not to say, Paul Arizin was a fantastic player. He had 108.8 win shares as a member of the Warriors. So from pure production standpoint, Paul Arizin should probably be that third. But for some reason, I just couldn't leave Nate Thurmond out there. That's a guy who, played a long time with the Warriors, was pretty much synonymous with the franchise for a few decades. And then after his playing career, also kind of went into the front office of the Warriors. And I think was just there until, just pretty recently still there. So yeah, he's a guy that I just, for whatever reason, production aside, I just couldn't do this team without Nate Thurmond. I thought he had to be on there for this Warriors big three.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a really tough one for me. You could even put a case for Arizin over Barry on the team in terms of he was in the key player on that championship team. Although Johnson was right there as well. And had a little bit of longevity. He brings in the Philadelphia years, which I don't know if there's any. I think it's an interesting era to have included. If you're kind of getting this in terms of like filling out team history as best as possible, maybe you could consider Arizin over Barry, or you could have Curry, Barry, and Arizin. That's probably what I would pick, even though there's no traditional big man, and we just kind of said that we would like a big man there. But I do think Arizin's case is a bit better than Thurman's, although it's absolutely very close. I think it's kind of a coin toss either way, but I'll be a little different. I'll pick Arizin and Barry and Curry for my team. I just hope for some good outside shooting and not worry so much about rebounding. So
yeah, but no, and that's like I think there's justifications for at least 4 or 5 of those guys. So I think that's a pretty fun team there, where I think you could pretty much have a bunch of different scenarios that involve a Steph Curry, and then after that really open it up a little bit. So it's a fun little franchise that we have there, where I don't think you're wrong with any answer that you have of those 4 or 5 guys.
Yeah. So next, a storied franchise, of course, most championships in the NBA, the Boston Celtics. And I don't think we're going out on a limb with Bill Russell and Larry Bird being definitely on there. I know.
Wait, don't assume. But yeah.
Obviously, Russell, we did a big series on him, 11 championships in 13 years, changed the way defense was played in the league, one of the premier players of all time. And Bird, obviously, transcended during his era, one of the great short list of great forwards of all time. Both of them are, I would say, probable top 10 players of all time, so that they would definitely belong on this list. And then there's a lot of guys who are possibilities on this list who would, almost be definites for sure on other franchises, but because the Celtics have had so much success, they're, it's hard to say. I think the best cases go to Paul Pierce, John Havlicek, and then I think those are really the 2 strongest cases. And some other cases you could definitely make: Robert Parrish, Kevin McHale, Sam Jones, who had 10 championships during the Celtics dynasty. Bob Cousy was the great point guard of his era, and Dave Cowens, who helped, along with Havlicek, keep that 70s team afloat that won 2 championships. So it's really, and you're not even talking about somebody who, like Kevin Garnett, obviously, even though he didn't play in Boston for that long, obviously was each transcendent for what they did for that franchise.
Yeah, this was a tough choice for me, but I went with Paul Pierce. It seems kind of wild that he would be as well revered as he is, but if you look at the numbers too, he stacks up number wise as well. Third most win shares at 138.4, third in games behind Havlicek and Parrish. Obviously you have the title there in the 2000s, but it seemed kind of weird, but I went Russell, Bird, and Pierce. It just seemed to work a little bit best. But this is one where I think you could honestly make a case for thousands of scenarios for these 3. Obviously you have to add Russell, you have to add Bird, but yeah, you can make a case, I think, for Pierce Pierce, Havlicek, Parrish, McHale, even to a lesser extent, like you said, Jones, Kuzi, Cowens, and like Garnett. But I went with Paul Pierce. I went with Russell Bird and Paul Pierce. I just thought it was. I was kind of shocked at how up there Paul Pierce was in a lot of the stats. I thought he would be behind some guys, but he's really not. So
yeah. Yeah, it's really tough. I mean, I think Havlicek and Pierce have very similar longevity, very similar in terms of numbers, very similar in terms of impact. I have a feeling Havlicek was a bit of a better player in his day than Pierce was in his day, but that's fairly close, in my mind. They really stack up. I guess the nice thing about Pierce is that you get the modern era, you get the recent Celtics with him, and with Havlicek, there's some overlap, obviously, with Russell. So I'd probably go with Pierce too, but you definitely could go along. I think it's interesting that Robert Parrish actually played more games as a Celtic than Paul Pierce did, which is pretty amazing.
Right, considering
only 4
like
more games, but yes,
right, because that guy, like one guy played his entire. I mean, for the most part, I mean, obviously you have the recent Paul Pierce, but you would pretty much put him. But Parrish, had a pretty good run with the Warriors, had a pretty, small but brief run with the Bulls, and a brief run with the Hornets too, and a few other. I think he was in one or two other. Was it one other team after that, or did I name all of them there? But either way, yeah, it's just like he just played forever, so it's just like you kind of forget that. Jesus, like Robert Parrish just played forever, played every game. I mean, that was a guy who was year in and year out always reliable too. So yeah, it was kind of fun to interesting, I think, to see him as high up as he was.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So. Next is the Sacramento Kings, also formerly the Kansas City Kings, also formerly the Cincinnati Royals, and formerly the Rochester Royals. Also had a little stint in Omaha there in the Kansas City days. So one of the longest standing franchises of all time. Also have not had a lot of success since their initial days in Rochester in terms of sustained success. Obviously, with the early 2000s in Sacramento being sort of the exception to that, and obviously that part has to be represented. There's the 50s years, they won the championship 51, which you would think that ought to be represented, and of course you have Oscar Robertson, who's clearly the greatest player in franchise history, who is the only no-brainer for me, absolutely for sure. If you're looking at the more recent Sacramento days, you have Chris Webber and Peja Stojakovic, who I think Webber's considered the better player overall, but you look at the numbers, and I think it's closer than a lot of people would think. There's Mitch Richmond, who was he was their great player of the 90s, even if they didn't have much of team success. And there's guys who were incredible for a while. Tiny Archibald, obviously in the 70s, but he didn't play with the Kings for that super long. Bob Davies, who was probably the best player in their 50s teams that won the championship, a great ball handler, much like Kuzi in his day. Jerry Lucas, who's all-time great, who spent a lot of his time with the Royals, and then a guy like Jack Twyman, who was Oscar Robertson's running mate and had incredible longevity. Probably not going to make this list, but certainly was worthy of a consideration at least.
Absolutely. Yeah, this was really tough for me. I went Oscar Robertson. He was a no-brainer to put on here. The other two were very difficult. I went with Chris Webber and Peja Stojakovic, but I did not feel good about it at all. Webber isn't as much of a slam dunk as you kind of think when you look at his numbers and you think, oh, Sacramento Kings, Chris Webber or whatever. That's when he rose to prominence. But you realize that it wasn't all that long, that you realize there were some injuries towards the end, and you realize production-wise, it wasn't as blow away as you thought, even though he was a key part of them kind of rising to prominence. Still, though, that's why I kind of picked him, because of the prominence that they sort of rose to in the 2000s, because Chris Webber was probably the central figure of them sort of emerging from the muck and then becoming, basketball returning to Sacramento in a lot of ways, and then becoming, a charter franchise there for a few years. So I put Webber in there, and Peja I put there as well, because not necessarily because he was one of the key parts of those 2000 teams, which he absolutely was, but more that his numbers were just, I was shocked at how great Peja's numbers were all time in terms of Kings franchise. I mean, he has arguably better credentials than Webber when you look at the numbers, next to each other. So yeah, I didn't feel good about either of those, and I feel like you can make a better case for guys like an Archibald or even a Bob Davies or whatever, but I think it speaks a little bit more to the franchise that it's really hard to come up with a number 2, and even more difficult to come up with number 3 for that. But before you give your top 3 though, an aside that I thought was pretty unbelievable, would you believe me if I told you that Jason Thompson is top 10 in all-time games played with the Kings? I saw that, and
I would believe you, but I don't know how happy I'd be about it.
Yeah, I was like, well, God, really? That's amazing. I mean, he was there forever, but it's he never did anything. anything. Like, it's just that was not a name that I expected to see pop up there. But there you go. So Jason Thompson, top 10 all time in games for the Kings.
Yeah.
So
Sam Lacey, number 1, by the way, for those who are curious. Oscar has the most minutes in franchise history by a reasonably significant amount. But yeah, so that's a tough one for me. I mean, I'm definitely going with Oscar at number 1. I do think that I think it's important to recognize the championship team and the Rochester team, and Davies was a really good player during his day. You know, like Bobby Wanzer was really good on that team too, but I think Davies was slightly, the numbers are close, but I think Davies was probably the better player of. So I would put him on there. That one tricky part of that is there's 2 point guards there, but you just have to kind of live with that. And then I would probably go with Weber as the third player. I agree with you on the case for Stojakovic, and some of those numbers are really impressive, but Weber probably, I would still probably place him slightly ahead in my pecking order there, and would give him there. And definitely feel like the need to represent that Sacramento team, obviously, being the team that I think people best know as, for their success, especially in Sacramento. So next is the Los Angeles Lakers, and another team, of course, with a storied history that I know annoys you to no end. This is a really weird. Obviously, there's so many all-time greats on the same. I'm not going to pick my for sure yet because we'll get there. But the guys who I think would be definite strong candidates for this list: Magic Johnson, George Mikan, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who of course also could be selected for the Bucks, which is going to give us an out there. Jerry West, Kobe Bryant, Elgin Baylor, and Shaquille O'Neal, who could be picked for the Magic or the Heat. And there's a bunch of guys on this list, who aren't on this list, who for most other franchises would definitely be a top 3 candidate. But the Lakers have so much that it's really hard to count them out.
Yeah, the Lakers, they pluck everybody, so it's like hard because there's a lot of guys that built legacies with other teams that then came over, like Shaquille O'Neal and a Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Then you have guys that did build their legacy through the Lakers or whatever, like your Jerry West, Kobe Bryant, Elgin Baylor's, and it's like this weird potential of, okay, well, who do I put in there? I mean, Mikan's a guy that's got to go in there. Magic feels like he's got to go in there, and now you're really left with like, geez, there's like a lot of guys here. This is not easy for me. I put Magic, Mikan, and Kobe. As far as Kareem, I'm saving him for the Bucks. I think the Bucks are going to need him a little bit more than the Lakers are going to need him for this. But Jerry West versus Kobe was one that I really struggled with. I deleted it. I had West, then I had Kobe, then I had West, then I had Kobe, and then finally I just said Kobe, and then decided to scroll away because I was probably going to spend hours debating if I should put Kobe or West on my hypothetical Big 3 team for the Over and Back podcast, and I realized that's maybe not the best use of time, but I still don't know, and I just said Kobe, but now I'm going to put it as West, but then I'm going to put it as Kobe. I don't know. You have to just go, because I'm going to change that too much. That's too hard. Kobe and West is a lot more difficult than people think, even numbers-wise, a lot more difficult than you'd think.
Yeah, they're really close in numbers. Kobe played for a lot longer, in his career, the longevity, which, obviously adds to it. He had more team success, winning 5 championships. West only won 1 championship. So I think either one is defensible. It's really close. I agree with you on Magic and Mikan. I mean, I think Magic was is the great transcendent point guard, the best point guard of all time, and so definitely deserves to be on this list. I mean, they won 5 championships, 9 finals with him. Mikan, was absolutely the dominant player of his day, and yeah, the obviously the Lakers have had other great big men, but if we couldn't put Kareem on the Bucks, I would probably pick Kareem. I would definitely pick Kareem, but we can put him on the Bucks, so I'm going to pick Mikan. And then I really we haven't talked about Elgin Baylor at all, but Elgin Baylor was an incredible
sure.
one of the greats of all time, and really should be on the list, but I do think is slightly behind West and Kobe, and I'm going to go with Kobe as well. But I'm the exactly same position as you, as I could go either way. I just think the longevity is there, and the team success being a bit greater. And I think they were close to. West may have been a slightly better player than Kobe was compared to average. Let's say he was a better player in his day than Kobe was in his day, but obviously Kobe was a great player in his day. So, and just because there were some people who I feel like you tried to shout from the heavens that he was the greatest thing ever, and maybe he wasn't that great, but he was still tremendous. So I'm
sure.
I would keep him on there for. But again, it's definitely a toss-up.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
So next is the Detroit Pistons, formerly of Fort Wayne, and there's a lot of really good players in their history. They had a lot of years of the 60s and 70s where they did not have much success really until the late 80s, but there's been a lot of very good players, and also their 2000s run. But the key players, I think the only guy who I think is would be a definite for most people, and I would say he's a definite for me, is Isaiah Thomas. There's a lot of debate about how effective he actually was as a player because his numbers are not, particularly that great, even if you kind of compare errors a little bit. I mean, even he's hurt obviously by the lack of, being able to shoot three-pointers compared to guards today, or, being that being a significant part of the game. But even compared to point guards of his era, he not necessarily isn't that strong statistically, but I do think the other stuff, I think it matters, and I think he was a leader of those teams. And they had a lot of good players, but I think he was really important to that. And then you got really like almost like 8 guys who you could make some cases for. Ben Wallace from the more recent championship teams. Bill Laimbeer was a great partner for Isaiah Thomas. Bob Lanier, maybe individually the best player in the franchise history, even though he did not play. His teams are not particularly good. Chauncey Billups, Finals MVP, all that good stuff. Dave Bing, great shooting guard of his time. Joe Dumars, MVP of the Finals as well. Grant Hill, only played there about 5 or 6 years, but was really elite player during that time. And then Larry Faust and George Yardley from their 50s days, in which they were able to, Yardley was a great scorer of his day. Faust was a strong big man, and they had a couple teams that went to the finals in the mid 50s behind those guys. So those guys, that team didn't really accomplish a whole lot. So those guys, I'm probably not going to stick on there, but I think they're worth at least mentioning.
Yeah, my 3, I went with Isaiah. I thought he was pretty much a no-brainer as well. I put Joe Dumars in there. Most games played with the Pistons. He's a guy that's synonymous with the team, for better, for worse in some ways, for recent history for Joe Dumars. Then I put Chauncey Billups on there because he's arguably the best player of all time when you look at the statistics. So I thought Billups had to be in there, but it was really tough because there were a lot of guys that have legit cases, and I think this is one that really almost all 3 I think could be debated because I think Isaiah is one that you got to put in there. But if someone wanted to say, hey, I'm going to put in Bill Laimbeer, Bob Lanier, and Chauncey Billups, like I'd be fine with that. I mean, there's a lot of different combos with the Pistons I think you can do, and people would be okay with, really.
Yeah. I would definitely go with Isaiah. I think I'm going to go with Ben Wallace as well. I just think that the way that he was able to help have them be great defensively, I think he was kind of the linchpin for those teams. Defensively, so I would. He was 4-time Defensive Player of the Year. One of the great rebounders of great rebounder as well. Didn't score much, but did everything else. I think he's worthy of being on there. And then it's tough. I would probably go with Bob Lanier. I think just he was so individually brilliant during his time, and was one of the great players of all time. Probably just. The most accomplished Piston in terms of just, looking at, numbers and production and all that. I mean, 22.7 points per game, 11.8 rebounds, one of the great big men of his time. And there were a lot of great big men during that time. So I would put him as third. That you run into, of course, the Lanier and you run into both Lanier and Ben Wallace being big men. But, you can probably, depending on the rules, you can figure it out. So next we have the Philadelphia 76ers, also formerly the Syracuse Nationals, which will become important in a moment. A lot of candidates here that are worthy. This is going to be a really tough one because of, we'll get into some factors in a moment, but we'll go through some of the candidates. The only guy that I think is for sure who is, and it was not, barely played in Philadelphia, but it was the Nationals' all-time player was Dolph Schayes. Led them to a championship and was really one of the 2 or 3 best player of the 50s during his time. Just, a really innovative player, really innovative forward, and definitely belongs to be on there in terms of longevity and production, all of that. You would obviously normally think, I think the first guy we think of when we think of 76ers is probably Julius Erving, but fortunately we can put him on the Nets if we want to, so we're going to table that and see if maybe he belongs on the Nets. He obviously played a lot more in Philly. It's a little weird not to have him on there, but he did win 2 championships with the Nets. Probably his greatest days were in the ABA, so I think there's a decent chance for that. And then a bunch of other guys.
And the Nets really need him. I mean, the Nets you're going to see are really going to need him. Dr. J on the court because they're going to struggle. Yeah,
that's a good point as well. So, and there's a lot of other great players. Charles Barkley, who you could also make a case with for the Suns, didn't have a lot of team success in Philly, especially after Doc and those guys left, but was incredibly productive there. I think he was second in MVP one year. But won his MVP with the Suns and probably had more team success there. Someone like Hal Greer, who was a great player, one of the keys for their 1967 championship team, and was one of the great guards of his days. Allen Iverson, of course, in the 2000s, led them to a finals, won an MVP. Will Chamberlain, who was their most important player for a championship and was in built himself from just an incredible scorer to being, an incredible passer and playmaker and doing a bunch of other things and defender for the Sixers, and was one of the greats of all time, obviously. And then a couple guys like Billy Cunningham, who had a long run with another part of the '67 team, and then Moses Malone, who didn't play there all that long, but obviously was MVP for their championship team in '83. Also, you could make a case for him on the Rockets as well. So. It's a really, like you pointed out in your notes, it's so many of the guys also did big things on other franchises that it makes it really hard to pick.
Yeah, it was. I had a hell of a time with this. I chose Dolph Schayes. I thought he was the most clear one because he doesn't really have any other relation to any other franchises. Otherwise, man, I don't know. Like Wilt Chamberlain, I think that's the guy I'm picking, and then I'm picking Hal Greer. So I think it's Schayes, Wilt, and Hal Greer. But I just didn't really like it all that much. I don't know. It's really weird, this franchise, because a guy like a Barkley seems a good case, but I kind of liked him more for the Suns. Allen Iverson seems like a guy that should definitely be on there, but I wonder if the longevity kind of plays a factor in there. Moses Malone probably has a better case on the Rockets or whatever. So I don't know. I put Schayes, Wilt, and Greer, but it is very interesting that the 76ers. It's not. I didn't realize that franchise had such an odd relationship with its stars or its top players.
Yeah, like most of those guys played there for like a good long time, and it's just like they, for whatever reason, a lot of them just had success elsewhere, enough success elsewhere where you could be like, oh, okay, well, you could put them on another team and that might make it work better, but. Yeah, I'm gonna go with Wilt as the other choice, since we didn't pick him for the Warriors, and obviously he belongs there. And then I'm gonna go with Iverson, just to have a more recent player. He won an MVP. I mean, Greer was fantastic and had better longevity, but Iverson at his peak was probably the stronger player, at least certainly the the more maybe more impactful player. Although I'm not trying to undersell Greer there at all. He was really great too. But I would probably go with Iverson as the third guy. It makes a more interesting team, perhaps. So Greer was a great player, but was a little bit less flashy than Iverson obviously was. So
yeah, it's interesting. Weird 76ers.
Yeah, weird 76ers. Yes, for a team that's had some really good team success and really, has some really strong errors. Yeah, it's an odd thing to pick. So next is the Atlanta Hawks, who also played in St. Louis, of course. And I think there are two really clear-cut cases for guys who should be on this team, and then I have almost no idea for the third guy. The two who definitely should be on there are Bob Pettit, who former MVP, led them to 4 finals in 5 years, including one championship in '58, and then Dominique Wilkins, of course, their great scoring champion and incredible player in the '80s and early '90s, and led them to their greatest success in Atlanta, and at least sustained success in Atlanta. And but after that, man, it is a little bit tricky. You got Cliff Hagan, who was Pettit's running mate in the 50s. You have Lou Hudson, who was a great scoring star in the 70s. You have Al Horford, who was the best player on their recent decade of playoff success, and was part of that 60-win team that was obviously fantastic. And somebody like Pete Maravich, who didn't necessarily have a lot of success there, but was a famous player, an incredible scorer, and although he has a case for the Jazz as well. Someone like John Drew, who we've talked about previously, is kind of an underrated, really. While he was a great player, he was absolutely a franchise scorer and did a lot of different things. And then Dikembe Mutombo, who wasn't there for very long, but was really impactful defensive player, and their real only major free agent they've ever signed, who was actually a franchise star, and led them to some pretty good success in the late '90s. So I don't know. It's kind of hard to say.
Yeah, this one was after Pettit and Dominique. I mean, those are no doubters. That's no question. I don't think anyone's going to argue with that. After that, it's kind of tricky here. I kind of had a tie with Cliff Hagan and Lou Hudson, and I thought for the purposes of, hey, let's get a little bit more of a well-rounded team, I was going to put Lou Hudson in there. I mean, Hagan, I think they're size-wise, they're not all that much different, but obviously Hagan played in a different era where his size was played a little bigger than it did for when Lou Hudson was in. So yeah, I chose Lou Hudson, but I think you could make a case for either Hagan or Lou Hudson as that 3. The rest of the guys, I I don't know. I just, nobody else really seemed to fit for me. Al Horford didn't seem like he had quite enough. Dikembe Mutombo seemed like a decent pick, but I mean, he has a case probably in Denver, more so than Atlanta. And then, yeah, Pete Maravich, I think a little bit more for Utah than Atlanta. But then, like, I don't know. It was kind of interesting, but I went Pettit, Neek, and Lou Hudson, but I think I can make an easy case for Hagan in there as well.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go with Al Horford. This is some bias coming in because Horford's a player who I've watched a lot as a Hawks fan and feel kinship toward, but really good, offensive and defensive player. I think he'd meld well with Pettit and Wilkins. He's not quite as great of an all-time player as Hagan or Hudson were, but I do think that in terms of complimentary would go, I think he would. I think he's done enough in their championships, and I think they, the success that they've had, no championships obviously, but they have had some pretty strong sustained playoff success, at least second round type conference finals playoff runs. I think that I would give it to him, but yeah, it's really a toss up between any of those guys. To be honest, it's really close. Yeah.
After Pettit and Neek, they can just go 2-on-3. They're fine. I think they can handle. I think they can handle it on their own. So
yeah. Mutombo would be great defensively too. Obviously, that would be a really good role for him. And he's an all-time great, but lacks like a really even his Denver run was like maybe like a year or two longer than it was in Atlanta. So it wasn't really that much longer. So I could see you making the case for Mutombo as well. But yeah, either way, so we'll see how it goes. We'll see how 2-on-3 works, and if they need to add a third guy after that, maybe they can find somebody. So,
right.
Next is the Washington Wizards, former Bullets, obviously, and for sure for them, I think it's Unseld and Hayes. They're two great stars of the 70 West. Unseld having been a former MVP, great defender and rebounder, and famous for his outlet passes, and Hayes being a great scoring star and one of the great big men of his era, one of the great power forwards with that turnaround jump shot and all that stuff. So those were really the key linchpins for their great success in the late 70s, where they won a championship and went to 4 finals in 6 years, I believe, or 7 years. So some really good. A lot of success there. Definitely the best success that franchise has had since the early 60s when they were an expansion team in Chicago. So I would go with them. And then the third star, there's a few really good choices. Gilbert Arenas, obviously, who brought them kind of back to relevance in the 2000s. What John Wall is doing right now, leading them to a conference finals. And I think the only thing against Wall right now is maybe he doesn't have, he's still pretty young into his career, although he's already played 4,000 more minutes than Arenas did for the Bullets. So you can make a case there. And then someone like Earl Monroe, who was just a fantastic player but didn't play there for very long, or Walt Bellamy, who was is really higher than I would have expected in some of the total team totals, like win shares. He's third overall in win shares, which surprises me given that he's he kind of bounced around quite a bit. I didn't think he was with the franchise for that long.
Yeah, it's actually Walt Bellamy was the one I chose here. It was kind of a surprise. I did not expect that I was going to end up with him, but he seemed to have really good numbers in those handful of seasons that he was there, and I kind of took me a complete surprise because I thought I was coming in probably going to choose Arenas. Looking at Arenas' career, it didn't really jump off the page as much as I thought it would have. He obviously, I think he's synonymous with the Wizards more so than any other franchise. Obviously, it's not the Magic or the Warriors or whatever. He's synonymous with the Wizards and was a big part of them, as a franchise kind of getting resurrected there in the 2000s. But yeah, I thought Bellamy just jumped off the page, so I went Unseld, Hayes, and Bellamy. And this one seems weird because John Wall is a guy that like I want to pick, and it's like if in another year it would be obvious to choose John Wall, but he's not quite there yet, so he wasn't right in there. But yeah, it seemed kind of weird not to put Earl Monroe in there, but so I was conflicted there in the Bellamy Monroe thing, but I when it was all said and done, I went Unseld, Hayes, and Walt Bellamy.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Wall, but it's really close. Or Arenas. Even though Bellamy has the numbers, I just feel like they the Bullets weren't really in when he was in Chicago. That team wasn't really particularly relevant back then. So, and also you're getting 3 big men on one team, and I think this is kind of one where I think it would be good to get a guard to balance it out.
Sure.
So yeah, I think Arenas or Wall. I think Wall has done enough to be on there But if you chose Arenas, I think that's perfectly valid as well. Phil Cheniere's another guy who was pretty strong, but injuries kind of cost him a lot of his career. But he's a guy who's sort of up there with Arenas and Wall in terms of what they've accomplished in Washington history, in Bullets or Wizards history. But I would probably go with Wall, given what the team success they've had is better than any of the team success they had with Arenas, leading the team.
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair.
Yeah, thanks. So next, Chicago Bulls. Not a hard top two for us. Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. I know you're going to argue about that vociferously. Rich.
Of course, yeah, no,
yeah.
The Jordan guy, I don't know. Look at the history. I think he did more for the Wizards, and the Wizards are going to need him later. I don't know. We just went over the Wizards. Damn it! There goes my joke. I just forgot the Wizards were above us.
All right,
forget it. Continue on. Never run. Go. Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen.
And the third star, a lot of interesting choices there. I mean, you have someone like Derrick Rose who won an MVP and was a franchise star for a very short period of time, but obviously injuries caught up with him, and there's other issues with that kind of knock him down a little bit. Also, someone like Jimmy Butler, who just got traded away from the Bulls. I think if Jimmy Butler had stayed longer with the Bulls, he's a guy I would be leaning toward. But now that he's with the Timberwolves, obviously he won't be contributing to Bulls history. Chet Walker, who was probably the best player of that early 70s team. They had a really well-rounded team, so there's some good guys there like Bob Love and Sloan. But I think Chet Walker is kind of a step above the rest of those guys. Artis Gilmore, who had a very good run in the late 70s in terms of numbers and production, but not as much impact as he had with the Colonels in the ABA. Well, we're going to get to how we're going to deal with the ABA in just a little bit, but and then someone like Horace Grant or Dennis Rodman, who of course was part of was the third best player during those separate Bulls three-peat championship runs, I think could be on there as well.
Yeah, I had a real tough time coming up with the three. I think there's a few cases that you can make. Like if it's a legit game being played, a guy like a Dennis Rodman or even like a Joakim Noah would be a perfect fit for, Jordan and Pippen. Obviously, Rodman would be a very good fit because we saw that in practice and it worked quite well. But yeah, a guy like one of those two dudes I think would be. But if we're talking about legacy, Chet Walker's one that definitely has to go up there. Derrick Rose is an interesting case too. I think you can really, if you look at the totality of his, Bulls career, yeah, it didn't end great, and yeah, there was some bumps along the way. But yeah, when you really look at it, I mean, he was just a prolific player for quite a few years. And then Artis Gilmore is another interesting case too, as you mentioned, just a prolific run with the team, a big part of them, in the 70s and 80s. Whether the success followed them much in the 80s or it did kind of come in the late 70s. But yeah, I was really conflicted here. I ended up going with Chet Walker, though. I went Jordan Pippen and Chet Walker. I thought that just kind of fits pretty well. But yeah, if we were playing like a legit, like actual you needed guys for a 3-on-3 game or whatever, I would have picked a guy like a Dennis Rodman or even like a Joakim Noah. Maybe probably Noah actually, if you needed one of those, if you want a blend of a guy that was there for quite a few years and kind of fits. But that didn't feel quite right, so I went with Chet Walker here.
Yeah, I would lean toward Walker as well. I think it's nice to represent that early 70s team, which had a lot of good players and had a lot of success, just kind of played in the wrong era. Yeah, I mean, Noah, I think actually has a decent case as well. But I don't think he was quite as impactful as a player as Walker was at his peak. Although he was very good. He was like, I had that year where he was like fifth in MVP or something, and maybe that overstated his impact. But he definitely was, a real unique, interesting player who had a lot of cool skills, and it was an important part of their franchise history. It's really interesting. Derrick Rose is 22nd in Bulls history in win shares. He is 31.4. The guy above him is Steve Kerr with 31.5. Now, win shares is not like the end-all be-all stat or anything like that, but that's a really interesting, obviously you think very different things about Steve Kerr's contributions to the Bulls versus Derrick Rose's contributions, but it's really interesting to see the comparison, and Rose has like 6,000 or like 5,500 more minutes than Kerr did during that time. Now, obviously the Bulls were more, they were breaking win records for that, so that helps raise Kerr's win shares because his team was more successful. But still, it's just I don't know what it says, but it's interesting.
Yeah, it is definitely for sure.
Yes. So yeah, I picked Chet Walker, so we'll go with that. So
okay, yeah. So we agree on Chet Walker. Yay.
Yeah, go Chet. So next is the Sonics, not the Thunder. We decided to take the Thunder and have them be separate since they're considered separate histories. I think by most people, so we decided to go with that. So yeah, there's another case where there's one clear player, I think, which is Gary Payton, and then after that, it becomes a little more difficult. Though you didn't seem to have much of as hard of a time with it. But I think the key guys, Jack Sikma, who was part of that championship run, Sean Kemp, who had some great longevity in the '90s, part of their most remembered teams, along with Payton, Gus Williams, who was one of the great point guards of his time and helped key them to a championship. Ray Allen, who they didn't have a lot of team success, but was a great player for his time, and then Dennis Johnson, who definitely did not have a lot of longevity there in Seattle, but was really was one of the great players individually in history, and combined with Gus Williams to lead that great team success. So I don't know. I forgot about Fred Brown, who was one of the has some of the longevity of downtown Fred Brown, great outside shooter for his day, and has a lot of the longevity records for team history, at least until Gary Payton came along. So it's a little bit tough for me, but I mean obviously Payton for sure, and then a couple others. I think you could pick through those guys.
Yeah, mine was pretty easy. I thought Gary Payton, Jack Sikma, and Sean Kemp, I thought were just kind of jumped off the page of me. Some cases to be made for those other guys, but I thought those three really were head and shoulders above the rest. So that was not as difficult as I kind of expected it to be with the Sonics, but those guys seemed to kind of jump off the page right away.
Okay. Yeah, Sigma I think is definitely. I would agree. He's number 2. I think he's a good shot on there. Yeah, it's hard for me with. I would lean toward Kemp as well. I think Fred Brown would be fairly close. But I think I'm going to go ahead and go with Kemp as well. But it's definitely a toss up for me. Gus Williams and Dennis Johnson I think were better players at their peak, but neither of them were lasted with the Sonics for that long, especially Dennis Johnson.
Right.
So yeah. Next, San Antonio Spurs had some success in their team history you may have heard about. I'm sorry, I skipped one. We'll do the Spurs first, and then we'll go to the next team while we're on there. It doesn't really matter the order in particular. So, of course, I think the no-brainers on there are Tim Duncan and David Robinson, who, of course, I don't think we need to get into Tim Duncan's accolades too much. We have a whole podcast devoted to that, but obviously the 5 championships and, one of the truly great, I think definitely a strong case for top 10 of all time. And David Robinson, I think he's in, among the top 15 or 20 of all time. So once you have 2 great players like that, 2 transcendent, players of the generations, I think that's a pretty good case for both guys.
Yeah, it was for me. It was Duncan and Robinson were no brainers 1 and 2. Third was a little trickier. I went with George Gervin just to kind of represent a little bit of the other era of the Spurs because I felt a little disingenuous picking Parker or Ginobili. But you can make a legit case for either of those guys as well. I just thought it just for the purposes of being a little bit more fun. I went Duncan, Robinson, and Gervin just because I think that'd be a fun little team on the court as well. Just interesting to see there. But yeah, legit cases for Parker and Ginobili, and very soon I think a legit case for Kawhi Leonard, who's definitely knocking down that door as well. But I went ultimately Duncan, Robinson, and Gervin.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say Leonard probably has a couple years away from being on that list. I mean, he's already a guy who's going to be an MVP candidate who you can't really say anything the same about those other guys. So I think he's there. But I think Gervin right now in terms of longevity, I would say Manu, I think, is fairly close. I would put Parker slightly down on that list, but James Styles would be another guy who I would, have a little bit also ran to get the ABA years, but his career kind of ended, was cut short by injury, so didn't quite have the same overall impact. So yeah, I would agree with your 3 on that. And then next, the Indiana Pacers. And interesting team history because, of course, they had their greatest success in the ABA. We've talked about those teams on a few different episodes. But clearly, I think number 1 impact, Reggie Miller of all time. I mean, by far the team leader in so many different categories and keyed some of their best NBA success in the 90s and early 2000s. Then you've got a bunch of guys who really contributed on a high level for the team. From the 70s championship teams, you've got someone like Mel Daniels, who was ABA MVP. You have someone like Roger Brown, who was great forward of his day. George McGinnis, who came on a bit later and then contributed on the Pacers for a little while longer, and then he kind of bounced around the league until he came back to the Pacers and wasn't very good. He was an incredible player, but relative to Pacers history, I think might be a little bit lower on there. And then a newer guy like Paul George, who's of course recently been traded to the Thunder, but has was a great versatile player who led some team success, and someone like Jermaine O'Neal in the 2000s, when they had a really good, promising team going on. I think those are really would be the top candidates as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, for me, this is a little tricky. It was Reggie. I went number one. I mean, obviously, he's a no-brainer. Roger Brown, a guy that we talked a lot about in our 70s series, and a guy that in a lot of ways was synonymous with the early part of the Pacers, with the ABA Pacers franchise, and then a little bit for obviously when they came to the NBA. So I put him in there, and the stats back him up as well as being a legit guy there. Then it gets really tough. Rick Smits, he played the most games outside of Miller as a Pacer, but he just seems like an odd fit. Danny Granger's kind of there, but it's like, I don't know. Do I really want Danny Granger? I'd probably go with Paul George, but I really don't feel great about it. I feel like I don't know. That's the pick that I kind of ended up with after a lot of thought, and I never really felt comfortable about it.
Yeah, I'd feel better about it if Paul George were sticking around, but now he's left.
Yeah, right. I'm like, I just make him like hey, come play for the Pacers Big Three team. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Yeah, I would probably go with Miller, Brown, and Daniels. I mean, Daniels.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to do. I really wanted to do that, but for whatever reason, my brain just kept going to Paul George. I don't know why.
You could definitely make a case for George. If I were going to swap them out, I'd probably swap out Brown for George just because of kind of a fit. And Daniels was an MVP kind of at his peak. Even though Brown may have been the overall better player, or at least overall better pace. I mean, you could go back and forth between them. They're both very, very close. So stats wise, Brown's a little bit better, but Daniels had obviously incredible impact too, and was an ambassador for the team. Even after his career as well. So I would go with Miller, Brown, and Daniels, but another one where it's very close. Obviously, you're talking about the all-time great players in franchise history. You're going to have to make some tough choices.
Yeah, it's a tricky one for sure. Pacers.
Yes. So another ABA team, the Denver Nuggets, where a couple of really strong all-time candidates there are Dan Issel and Alex English, who both had great longevity for the team and were part of some very good teams in the 80s. Issel was part of some pretty good teams in the late 70s as well. We've talked about how Issel and English are both, among the great all-time scorers in history. We've kind of forgotten about, especially Issel, I think, I've kind of forgotten about how many points he really did score during his career. And then you have guys who had shorter runs there. I mean, David Thompson, who was an incredible player, led them to the finals in 76, but was cut short because of substance abuse issues. Byron Beck, who was there for the ABA years and was, a really strong contributor for them. Carmelo Anthony, who, of course, began his career in Denver and had, 8 strong years as at least as an offensive player, and is, up there in leaderboards of all-time history. And then, other guy who put on there, who I mentioned had a short stint but was pretty impactful, was the Kevin Mutombo, who, in recent history, probably their greatest moment, of course, is him holding the ball after the upset of the Sonics in 1993. So I don't think Mutombo is the best case, but I think he's at least worthy of mention.
Yeah, my guys were I went with Dan Issel, Alex English. Those two were no-brainers. And then David Thompson, a guy that just, all three of those dudes, I think, put up prolific numbers for the franchise. It's hard to really, I mean, Carmelo Anthony was a guy that I definitely wanted to try to put in there, but it was hard not to, these three just I thought were head and shoulders above the rest. So it was a fairly easy pick for me with Issel, English, and Thompson.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Carmelo ahead of Thompson. It's really close. They both have some comparable numbers overall. Anthony was there for a bit longer. Did lead them to a conference finals. I'm going to give him a little bit of a lean and sort of get a more modern. You get a little more. Balance in terms of eras there, but I totally get why you would say Thompson. I mean, he was he was an extremely elite player, at his very, very peak. It just his peak didn't last very long, and I think Carmelo was a good player for longer than Thompson was, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
And next we have the Nets, the Brooklyn Nets, New Jersey Nets, New York Nets, New York Americans, very briefly. And since we did not put Julius Erving on the Sixers team, he's obvious no-brainer for the Nets, even though he only played there for 3 seasons. They won 2 championships. He was, he's up there in the leaderboard in team history despite having a relatively short stint there. So he's definitely, he's no question. And then the other no-brainer is Jason Kidd, who led them to, their best success in the NBA with those 2 finals runs in the early 2000s. Harden's relatively short stint there, but certainly was impactful. Was the MVP candidate and was helped turn around a team that had done very little and made it into a success, a championship success, and then is still a pretty good team for a few more years after that.
Yeah, the Nets need some help, man. This is pretty rough here. I put Erving in there. I think he definitely needs to help them, so it kind of sucks taking him away from the Sixers, but putting him on the Nets. But I think it works out. I mean, he is synonymous with that franchise's, early success, or really all their success that franchise had in a lot of ways. Jason Kidd, there's some case that he could go to the Mavs or somewhere like that, but I thought it made all the sense in the world for him to go to the Nets as well. Great numbers as a member of the Nets and also the success that you mentioned. And the third guy, I guess Buck Williams. It's really, really falls off a cliff after the Erving and Kidd. I don't know, man. You can make a case for any number of guys. I went Buck Williams, but it's not good. It's Nets history, not great at all.
Yeah, and Buck Williams was totally a solid player.
Yeah, absolutely. Just it's just like if you came out there with Buck Williams, and it's like, well, we have Jerry West, and we have Kobe, and it's like Buck. It's like Buck, you're fine, but man, it's like your best three people in your franchise. It's like, well, I am. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's just like.
Maybe the Nets could sign Elgin Baylor to a 10-day contract and give him a minute of NBA time so we could put Elgin Baylor on the Nets.
Yeah, right. They need that because I was like, Buck's a fine guy, but when everyone's coming out with their best and it's like, Buck Williams, oh man, again, no, I don't want to besmirch Buck, and if he's listening, or I don't know.
Yeah.
Could Buck listen? I don't know if Buck is.
I'm sure he can listen.
Okay. I wasn't sure if he was dead or not. I don't know that
he's
Buck
alive.
I don't know why Buck Williams would die. He is very alive. Okay, good. All right, we're good. I didn't want to say that he's listening in case he's possibly dead.
Right.
Still,
yes. So
still with us. But
he's still with us. It's good. Yeah. So
good. I'm glad. But Buck's good. But just
it's really hard because the best choices are Buck Williams, Richard Jefferson, Brook Lopez, and Vince Carter, who's probably a better choice for the Raptors. So
right,
and the Raptors really need him desperately. So we're not going to pick him. Although I'm surprised how high he is up on the longevity, or some of the win shares. He's 7th of all time despite not playing there for very long. So I'm going to go with Brook Lopez. It's really close. I think maybe just because it would be nice to have Buck's more of a power forward, Brook's more of a center. You're gonna Brooks has some nice outside shooting, which could balance well with those guys. But you go either way. I mean, Doc and Kidd are going to get you. They're going to get you a lot of buckets no matter who you are. So. I think that's their best. But I don't know. Putting Brook Lopez on there, it's just he's a good enough player. But
he became their franchise most games, right? This past season, if I remember correctly.
I think
was he just short of it?
I think he has the most points in franchise history. I believe.
Oh, that's what it was. That was it. Was yes,
right.
So, that's what it was. Okay.
And then got traded to the Lakers, so no longer able to contribute as a. I'm changing my mind. I'm going to go with Buck as well. I'm gonna go with Buck. I decided that Buck's a better choice, so more respectable choice. Plus, you got to have the goggles. You gotta make it work. So, next we have some better options for the Houston Rockets. We have I think our for sure is Hakeem Olajuwon. Our also for sure, but not maybe quite as for sure, is James Harden, who you could also make a case for the Thunder, which we'll get to in a little bit, but probably not going to go with that. And obviously Harden's been an MVP candidate for the last few years. Olajuwon led them to 2 championships and won the MVP. So I think clear cut. Obviously, as long as Harden, I think Harden's sticking there out for a long time, unless there's some catastrophic injury or something. He's I think he's made a clear case for being the second best. Well, I would say. We'll get to that. So the other ones: Calvin Murphy, Rui Tomjanovich, Moses Malone, and Yao Ming. As we mentioned earlier, Moses Malone, you could make a case with the Sixers as well. Moses won 2 championships with the won two MVPs with the Rockets and led them to a finals as well. So he was absolutely an elite player for his time. The issue is, not much longevity with their only 6 seasons with the Rockets. So, maybe you could reward, Murphy or Tomjanovich or somebody who had some more longevity there.
Yeah, I went with, and there's a reason why we'll explain a little bit why I didn't choose Moses, but here I went with Hakeem, James Harden, and then I put Calvin Murphy in there. You could make a solid case for Yao Ming as well, but I thought Hakeem, Harden, and Calvin Murphy were the three that really stood out for me. Moses, you could put if you wanted to, but for the purposes of this, we have a secret team that I want to put Moses on later. So,
ooh, secret team, interesting. I'm excited about that. Well, I'm going to go ahead and put Moses here, even though, like I said, I just think he was, he was just a dominant player when he played there. I think I'm going to go with him, even though we've got Olajuwon and Malone, and we got the two big men. I think we'll make it work. James Harden will shoot enough for them to get some good rebounds, and all Moses really needs is just to be able to get the rebounds, and it'll be fine. So I think we'd make that work.
Yeah, you don't need any more shooting once you have Harden. Like, you're pretty good after that. Like, he'll take care of that for you.
Right. Exactly. Yes. So. Next, we have the Phoenix Suns, and this is a really hard team to decide on. Honestly, I mean they have some great transcendent players, but like everyone in terms of like franchise history, they have so many guys who have like almost exactly equal cases. And if you look in terms of the stats they produced, in terms of kind of the eras that they were effective, I mean you have a lot of guys who have just like really solid cases, and no one with a case that absolutely just like stands out like mind blowing. I mean, I put for sure Steve Nash with the with the Suns. He also maybe could make a case with the Mavs, but he had the two MVPs, obviously, but he's like only third all time in win shares, and you compare his production versus Kevin Johnson's production, and Johnson kind of like beats him in a lot of ways, and you're kind of like, that's interesting. But I think Nash it'd be interesting to see what Kevin Johnson's career had been like had he played the years that Nash had played instead of playing the years that he had played, whether that would have made a difference or not. I know obviously point guard play changed a lot from Johnson's era to Nash's era, but then again, Nash was key in making that era of change, and with the way that he directed the Suns in the 7 seconds or left. So even if the on-court impact, even if you argue the MVPs overrate that a little bit, the off-court impact was incredible and makes him on there. And then we've guys like Charles Barkley, obviously won an MVP there. Shawn Marion, who he's all-time leader in win shares, and I think was an underrated aspect of why 7 seconds or less worked. Johnson, as we mentioned, someone like Alvin Adams, who was a great player in the 70s and 80s, led them to finals appearance. Amar Stoudemire, another part of the 7 seconds left, a guy who was there forever, like Walter Davis or Paul Westphal, even some of those guys who really you had some great years with the team and really are really incredible. But yeah, a lot of guys who. Some of them who had cases for other teams, and some of them who just didn't quite it's sort of like the Suns team history. Like they are have one of the best winning percentages of all times, but they have never won a championship and only been to the finals once. That's kind of their player choices kind of encapsulate that in a way.
Yeah, it's kind of tricky here. I went with Steve Nash. I went with Charles Barkley as well. I thought Charles kind of fit a little bit better with it. I mean, even though he was only there for quite a handful of years, they were very, important years for the franchise, really good years for the franchise. So I put him in there. And then the third, I was really, really tough, but I went with Alvin Adams. I thought Alvin Adams' stats really jumped off the board for me a little bit, especially when it's so hard to kind of figure out those other guys. And there were so many other dudes that you could make legit cases for that Alvin, for whatever reason, I just said, hey, look, the stats look a little bit better for him, but you can make a reasonable case for a lot of those guys. And I felt really bad leaving Shawn Marion off. I feel like he's going to send a quote now to somebody like this team's going to go out there and he's going to be sitting there oh, come on. Really? I don't get love even on the Suns' big three. But yeah, so I apologize, Shawn Marion. I would almost feel bad and put Shawn Marion on there anyway. Plus, if it was actually a 3-on-3 game, you'd want somebody like Shawn Marion because he can do everything. But ultimately, I went with Steve Nash, Alvin Adams, and Charles Barkley.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to go with Marion, Nash, and Barkley as well. I love Alvin Adams. He's really great passer, really fun player to watch. But I'm going to go with Marion slightly ahead of him. I feel like even though Barkley's time there was short-lived, I think the impact he had was so great. Nash, we've already kind of explained the reasons, even though I hate to leave Kevin Johnson off because he was a great player. Not so good of a person, I guess, but given some of the things he's been accused of. But great player, and but yeah, I would put Nash ahead of him for kind of the reasons we talked about, even though, like I said, I wonder what it would be like if they had played in the exact same era. But again, we don't know. So we have to say how they played compared to their eras, and Nash had a bigger impact. So.
Yeah, and Kevin Johnson's a killer too. If you go back and watch his YouTube videos, it's pretty incredible what he was able to do. I mean, that's a guy who's like Russell Westbrook in the early 90s when there wasn't guys that were that size just dunking as well as they are. The problem with Kevin Johnson, he's such a little turd in real life that I have such a hard I wanted to put him on there and I was just nah, I can't. He's just a turd. I don't want him on my team, so.
So next we have the Milwaukee Bucks. As we mentioned earlier, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar still leads a lot of the, he's up there on a lot of the leaderboards in Bucks history, in terms of win shares and things like that. I think a no-brainer obviously led them to a championship and another finals, and their greatest success they've ever, had. Although the '80s team also had some great success as well, led by Sidney Moncrief. I think is the other no-brainer for that team. We talked about them in previous episodes about, how really great they were and how they just happened to come in at the same time as the great Sixers and Celtics teams of the '80s. So a lot of other good players you could pick, but none of them necessarily had super long time with the team. Marcus Johnson, who we've talked about in terms of some of the great underrated players of all time. Bob Dandridge, also part of that early '70s Bucks team and also contributed later on. Michael Redd, great offensive player, great three-point shooter in the late 2000s. Ray Allen, late '90s, early 2000s. Obviously one, a really great player in NBA history, never really kind of stuck in one spot. And Terry Cummings, who was, a great player who helped, sustain that really good run for the Bucks in the late '80s. Really versatile, incredibly great forward during, for the Bucks, and one of the most important players in franchise history, obviously.
This was a tricky one, but I thought, Kareem, he's probably got to go here. The Lakers probably didn't need him. The Bucks probably need him a little bit more. Then I went with Sidney Moncrief, and then I went with Marquise Johnson as my third. I thought those guys were good. You can make a legit case for Dandridge and a few other guys, but I thought those three really kind of stood head and shoulders above the rest.
Yeah. I'm going to go with Ray Allen. I think kind of as a peak player, he may have contributed a little bit more than Marcus Johnson or Dandridge, but it's really close. He didn't quite have the same longevity as they did, but I do think that he was really, really impactful. I don't know. Johnson's really close though. That's a really tough one. I guess I like the idea of getting a more modern player on there. Moncrief and Johnson overlap a bit, so I'm going to go with Ray Allen, but Johnson it's really a it's very close, and Dandridge is another great case. That's a really hard one for me, but I am going to go with Ray Allen.
Yeah, I think that's solid too.
All right, thank you. Trailblazers. So one for sure I think we would agree is Clyde Drexler, who had great longevity, led them to a couple finals, was the best player in there, obviously a member of Team USA. And then a lot of people would put Bill Walton as a no-brainer, and obviously their greatest team success was the '77 championship year, very lauded. Walton, obviously, an incredible, you played first day, but, really a short-lived run in Portland because of the injuries and the other issues that we've gone through extensively. So I still think he belongs, but I would take him off the absolute no-brainer for sure. And then, a lot of really good players. Terry Porter, who I think is a little bit underrated in terms of his impact. LaMarcus Aldridge, who is not a favorite of Blazers fans, but is, up there pretty high in the leaderboards. Rasheed Wallace, who's up there higher than I would have expected in the leaderboards in team history, and obviously was an impactful player. Someone like Damian Lillard, who's, clearly the franchise player now, one of the great guards of this day. And Brandon Roy, who, in the late 2000s before the injuries hit him, was a great player and really on track to do some great things. I think it doesn't quite have enough longevity to be on there, but it's certainly worth mentioning.
Yeah, for me, I went with Clyde Drexler, Bill Walton, and I went Rasheed Wallace there. I thought Rasheed just the years he was there, I think were fairly important years, and the numbers really stack up as well. But you can make a case for Porter, Aldridge, and then really, even though Roy's career was so short there, he's a guy that definitely seems like one that should be there. And Damian Lillard's a guy that's building up that resume, so in a few years we could put him. But I went with Drexler, Walton, and Rasheed Wallace.
Okay. Yeah, I'm obviously Drexler and Walton. I'm actually going to go with Terry Porter. I do think that Lillard's going to eventually be the guy who's on this, but I think I'm going to go with Terry Porter. Really good. Really had a long career with the Trailblazers and was probably the second most important player on those teams. Really good running mate for Drexler. I think having a guard on this team would be helpful. So although obviously Drexler's forte was not ball handling necessarily, even though he was versatile, did a lot of things. So I would probably go with Porter, Drexler, and Walton. But there's definitely some other good cases there. Lillard is making one, and Roy up there as well. Rasheed, he was great too, but I feel like maybe we have a couple too many Well, I guess you can kind of have some decent balance with Rasheed, Walton, and Drexler, and that would be a fun team to watch for sure. Watching Rasheed and Walton play together, that would be pretty incredible. Yeah, so I'm rethinking this a little bit, but I'm just going to go with Porter and lock it in. Next is the Los Angeles Clippers, also the San Diego Clippers and Buffalo Braves in the past. We've had episodes on the history of this franchise and how they've been cursed to some unfortunate times. They've, of course, had great success recently, which is, well, at least this era with Chris Paul leaving. They're transitioning into a different era. With Blake Griffin probably as their featured star. It'll be interesting to see how that happens. I think Paul right now is the only absolute, definite guy that I would put on there. Just because his impact and his, he's a career leader in a lot of things and win shares and a lot of big numbers, and he's been the straw that stirred the drink there. Even though Griffin's really important too, and to a lesser extent, Dan or Jordan. I would say, we've talked a lot about Elton Brand being a really important player for the 2000s Clippers and how underrated he was, and led them to that conference finals appearance or I guess semifinals appearance in 2006. Bob McAdoo for the Buffalo Braves was, won an MVP, and I believe was top three times an MVP for that franchise. And although his success there was short-lived, there aren't a whole lot of guys who played for a long time for this franchise. So I think he's definitely up there. And then somebody like Randy Smith or Danny Manning, who kind of were some of the key guys in the other decent eras that they've had, or kind of decent runs. I think those guys are a tier below. Yeah, I really think there's probably 4 or 5 guys who really have any case here.
Yeah, for me, it kind of seemed disingenuous that I picked all these recent guys, but it is the Clippers, so I went with Chris Paul, Elton Brand, and Blake Griffin there, and didn't really have much of an argument there. I thought those guys all, but yeah, McAdoo you could probably put in there, but yeah, it seems it's not a franchise littered with great franchise players, so unfortunately, not a ton to choose from.
Yeah. I'm going to go with Paul, Blake, and I'm going to go with Bob McAdoo. I think even though, the kind of the short-lived run there, I think he was so incredibly great for the times that he was great. It's nice to get a Brave in there as well. Nice to get a 70s guy. I think Brand and Griffin is a toss-up. I think you could definitely still pick Brand right now, but at some point Griffin's contributions, are going to, just overwhelm to that point. So I'm going to go ahead and pick him now, but it's very close. So next, the Cleveland Cavaliers. So surprise, surprise, LeBron James is our definite choice for this franchise. I don't think we need to say a whole lot more about it because I think everyone here pretty much knows what LeBron James has done. But obviously, tremendous players, and the franchise history has not been. They've had some good runs and some good players there, but in terms of picking 2 and 3, there's a lot of guys with fairly equal cases. Somebody like Mark Price and Brad Daugherty from the late 80s, early 90s teams that were really good. We've mentioned Daugherty's really kind of an underrated center for his time. That the injuries kept him from having great longevity, but he was up there with a guy like Ewing during the years that he played. And Price obviously was a really good guard for his time. And another guy, Julius Erving, obviously had a long run of sustained success and was part of those good Cavs teams of the late 2000s along with LeBron, and you kind of complimented him fairly well, even though not super important. And then Kyrie Irving, and to a lesser extent Kevin Love right now. Obviously Kyrie, I think has a strong case to be on this list, given what he's meant to the franchise and leading to the championship, and Love as well, even though he hasn't been with the franchise as long.
Yeah, me, I went with LeBron, obviously, no-brainer there. I went with Mark Price, and I went with Julius Erving, I thought, for the longevity of him being there, and then also the production, too. I think Big Z had a quiet, great seasons there. So, I was fairly easy on the LeBron, Mark Price, and Big Z. But, yeah, a few cases for some other guys, but I thought those guys were the more obvious ones for me.
Okay. I'm going to go with LeBron, and then I'm going to go with Daugherty, and I'm going to go with Kyrie. I think Daugherty was a better player than Z, even though Z has the longevity there, and I could definitely see either way. But Daugherty was almost a 2010 guy, and Z was good, but not quite at that level. And I think that Erving is a stronger player than Price, even though Price had some really good skills and was a good outside shooter. But I mean, Kyrie's just individual game is incredible, and I think he's learned to complement LeBron very well. He's not much of a defensive player, but I'm not sure Price was all that great of a defensive player either. So I think I'm going to go with those three. But like we keep saying, there's cases for lots of guys here.
Sure.
Yeah. The Utah Jazz. So for sure, we're gonna go with no brainer here. Karl Malone and John Stockton. Not real hard to get these two, and then this is another one where the third choice. There's not like a whole lot of super great options here. I think the best, in terms of historical player is Adrian Dantley, but Dantley didn't really. I guess he did play 7 seasons with the Jazz. Now that I'm looking at it, we averaged 30 a game, and led the league in scoring for a long time. Was just incredibly efficient during that time. Not really regarded as much of a defensive player, but I don't know, when you have offense that good, you don't necessarily have to have great defense. And then a few guys like Andrei Kirilenko. Darren Williams, who's really good, but just for kind of a short time, and then somebody like Pete Maravich, who was for the New Orleans version of the franchise, obviously not so much in Utah. Was the initial franchise and had some really great seasons. I mean, he averaged 25 points, 5.6 assists, 4.3 assists, and and was able to, I believe he led the league in scoring 1 year, and was able to, be well-rounded for a while before the injuries caught up with him. So, it is, there aren't necessarily a lot of, there's a lot of like good players that they've had, but not like a lot of great ones outside of that. Hayward, I don't think played there long enough to be on this list, even though he's, had some good years as well.
Yeah, no, I went Stockton Malone, obviously, no brainer, and then I went Adrian Dantley. You can make a case for AK-47, Andrei Kirilenko, but I thought Dantley, Stockton, Malone were the no brainers there, with Stockton and Malone being the most no brainers of almost any franchise that we've had so far, maybe other than LeBron and Cleveland or whatever. But pretty easy list for me there.
It's tough. I mean, do you value Dantley's just incredible offensive game? Is that needed with Malone and Stockton, or would you rather have Kirilenko, who's kind of the more
Kirilenko's a guy who probably works in a little bit more in a 3-on-3 game, like we're talking about with Sean Marion a little bit earlier. So that is where it's a little interesting, is where if you're talking about a straight game, maybe then you would take Kirilenko. But I'm kind of valuing the overall totality of the career or whatever, and that's why I thought Dantley more prolific of the scorer, and a few other gaudy numbers to put Dantley above other guys on the list, including Kirilenko.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Kirilenko, but I totally see why you would go with Dantley. I don't think there's anyone else who's necessarily a really strong candidate for the team. I would say, I'm going to go with Kirilenko, just I think because of the fit there, and I think the longevity and the impact is close enough that it's just depending on what you kind of want from that team. So. Next, Dallas Mavericks, and another very strong for sure in Dirk Nowitzki, pretty obvious there. And then a lot of maybes there. Rolando Blackman and Derek Harper, Jason Terry, Mark Aguirre, Michael Finley. I put Steve Nash in here, although I don't think that's really a realistic one, and Jason Kidd as well, who obviously they're good. We've already selected them for the Nets and the Suns, but I think there's at least you can think about them in terms of where they are in a team impact history. So. Blackman obviously was a great player for some of those good '80s teams. You can make Derek Harper as well. You had a good impact there. Jason Terry, part of their 2010 championship team, and had a long run there in Dallas alongside with Dirk. Pretty good, second, third best player, but not really, a guy I really put there on the franchise list. Mark Aguirre came out better than I kind of expected in some certain things in terms of his ability to score and be kind of efficient. He was sort of in some ways a poor man's Adrian Dantley, who was later traded for. And Michael Finley was kind of part of that big three, but along with Dirk and Steve Nash, but Finley didn't really have. He wasn't actually there for that long. So you got a bunch of guys who have about are really close to the same case.
Yeah, for me, Dirk was obviously no brainer. Then it got kind of tricky here. I went Michael Finley and Rolando Blackman. Legit case for Jason Terry as well, which seems strange because I feel like Michael Finley seems synonymous with that franchise and Jason Terry doesn't. But when you look at it, Jason Terry, I think, played more games than Michael Finley there, because you forget that Finley left in 05 and Terry was there until, 2012 or whatever. So, and then he came so early as well. So yeah, like Terry has a legit case. Derek Harper, I think, has a good argument as well. But I ended up going with Dirk, Michael Finley, and Blackman. But there are a lot of guys that I think you can make a case for other than Dirk. I mean, I think you got Dirk, no doubt, and then the other two is really a grab bag. And I really wouldn't argue with almost 4 or 5 different guys in those spots.
Yeah, I would. I would go with Blackman as well, and then it's really kind of tough. I would go with Finley over Terry, even though I kind of want to go with Terry because he was part of the championship team. I feel like they were close to as impactful as each other, but I think Finley was the overall better player, so I'm going to go with Finley. But it's another one that's extremely close. Yeah, it would be nice to. I kind of wish we could put Kidd on here because I do think he's kind of a better choice than any of them, but I think he's needed by the Nets more than he's needed by the Mavs.
Right.
So next, the Miami Heat, who have a lot of interesting players along there. Obviously, our for sure is Dwayne Wade, who's part of their great success of their 2006 championships, and then they're with the LeBron years as part of the Big Three. You would normally put LeBron, for any if it hadn't been first time in Cleveland, LeBron would certainly be a no-brainer for this list as well. But obviously, we're picking him for Cleveland. Then we have a lot of interesting choices. We have Alonzo Mourning, who I think has a really strong case. But then also, there's a possibility the Hornets really need some help, and he is a kind of possibility for there. Also, Chris Bosh, who part of that great Big Three. Shaquille O'Neal, who also is, you could put him for the Lakers or the Magic, and Tim Hardaway, who was really good for the. They had a pretty good run in the late '90s, early 2000s, and he kind of helped key that. And there's somebody like Eddie Jones as well, but I don't think he's quite as on the level of all timers as those other guys are. So I would put them kind of ahead of Eddie Jones, even though he's pretty good on the career marks in terms of franchise history.
Yeah, the Heat were. One thing I found was kind of funny in doing the research for them that other than Dwayne Wade, no other Heat player had played over 600 games with that franchise, which is kind of weird because there's a lot of really good guys in there, a lot of good years, and it's a young team or whatever, but you would assume some other guys maybe would get there. But yeah, no one was, I know Mourning was kind of close. But yeah, for me, I ended up with Wade, Mourning, and then I put Chris Bosh in there. It seems kind of weird that Chris Bosh would be in there, but he seems like a guy that might work a little bit better for Toronto than he does for here. But I thought, his years in the Heat were so important and were so good that he seemed like a good choice here. But you could also, I think, make a pretty good case for a Tim Hardaway. But I thought Dwayne Wade and Lonzo were the 1-2. I think there's good chance you put those guys in there, and then the other third, it was tough, but I ended up with Bosh.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go with Wade, Bosh, and then Shaq. I'm gonna put Shaq on the Heat, and I'm gonna do something different with the Magic, just because I just feel like we want to we obviously have to put Shaq somewhere. So I feel like this is the best place for a Shaq versus the Magic, which I don't think needs him quite as much as the Heat do. So next we have the Charlotte Hornets, or Bobcats, and we're of course only considering the Charlotte aspect of the history here. We'll deal with the New Orleans, the New Orleans Hornets / Pelicans history in the Pelicans franchise. For those keeping score, I know everyone here definitely is. We have it's not a great list of options, which is why I wanted to have Mourning for this team, because we have Mourning, as we mentioned, who. And we also have Gerald Wallace, who's a really good player for the Bobcats in his day. Kemba Walker, who's had some strong play going on. Larry Johnson, who was pretty good, and someone like Baron Davis, who kind of split his time between Charlotte and New Orleans versions of the Hornets. So. He's one where it's a little bit weird here because he's technically separated by that, even though he did it all with one franchise. So that's one weird thing where the split in history sort of hurts his impact. So yeah, Muggsy Bogues is kind of when he's has some of the when he's one of the best cases that you really didn't mention him. It's really hard to pick.
Yeah, I went with Muggsy Bogues ? Larry Johnson and Gerald Wallace. This is a bad one, and we should move on because it makes me sad.
Okay. Well, I at least got Mourning on there, so I feel decent about that. Gerald Wallace, he's a pretty good. He's a very, very poor man's Sean Marion, I guess. So, and I'll go with. I'll go with Larry Johnson right now, but I think Kemba Walker is probably going to be on here relatively soon. So I think Larry makes a more interesting team right now. So I'm going to go with that.
Deal.
All right, the Magic. Luckily, we have Dwight Howard, who, even though at his peak wasn't as good of a player as Shaq, had more longevity with the Magic. So I feel like he's a strong player. And then I think really the only other candidates are the guys who I would pick would be Tracy McGrady and Penny Hardaway, who by far, along with Shaq and Dwight, are the best individual players in franchise history. There isn't really anyone else who even comes close to it, even though McGrady and Hardaway didn't actually play that long, and Shaq obviously didn't play that long for the Magic. They all, I think by far have the biggest impact in franchise history. Nick Anderson, even though he's up there on some of the leaderboards, I don't think he was quite the same player. Jameer Nelson, same way.
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty easy choice for me. Dwight Howard was a no-brainer, and then I threw Tracy McGrady and Penny Hardaway in there. I thought that was, there's really no... I don't think you can make a case for pretty much any other combo of guys.
Yeah. So you realize you didn't pick Shaq, right?
Oh, did I not put him on the Lakers?
No, I don't. Wait, did you put him on the Lakers?
Did I? I thought I put him on the Lakers. Let me make sure I did, because that would be bad if I never picked Shaq.
Here and
Magic, Mike, and oh god, I did not put Shaq on any team. This Shaq guy, is he any good? I mean, let's be honest, he's just big. Okay, hold on a minute. Now we got to do some. Oh boy, sorry. See you later, Chris Bosh. Shaq, welcome to the Heat.
All right, there you go. Okay.
Sorry, Bosh. I really thought I put him on the Lakers. That's what happens when you do the list over a course of a few days. So, thank you for noticing that. So,
there you go. So next we have Timberwolves. Kevin Garnett, obviously. Then the choices are not that inspiring. Kevin Love, Karl-Anthony Towns, who's obviously I think as long as he sticks around, will be on this list, and maybe he's already on it. Wally Szczerbiak and Ricky Rubio just left the Timberwolves for Utah. So Wiggins is obviously somebody who you could make the case for at some point, but his impact is sort of been questionable to begin with, and he's not a guy who I think has quite come out as much as Karl-Anthony Towns has already to be a franchise player. I mean, he might get there, but right now I'm not kind of putting him in that category yet, and obviously he's very young in his career.
Yeah, I went with Garnett, of course. Then I put Kevin Love, and then I had a real tough time with number 3. I was split between Wally Szczerbiak and Sam Mitchell. I ended up with Sam Mitchell just to give some representatives to the late 90s Timberwolves a little bit more. But yeah, it's not a lot of great choices on that list. Yeah. So let's go with Sam Mitchell because he's more fun than Wally Szczerbiak.
Too bad we can't put George Mikan on this for Minnesota and then move Elgin Baylor to the Lakers, but that would be breaking our rules. So yeah, I'm going to go with Garnett and Love are, I think, clearly the best franchise players in history. Szczerbiak actually has a better track record than I think. Yeah, it actually isn't too bad. I'm going to go with Towns, even though I know it's really early, but I just think he's just such a transcendent player, or going to be one that I feel comfortable putting him on here, even though it's, I may look foolish again if we do this again somewhere in the future, but I'm just going to go ahead and put him on there.
I think that's fair. Yeah, no, right. It's not a lot of good choices here, so do whatever you want. Yeah.
So next we have the Raptors. We have don't have really anybody for sure because it's a very confusing list. We have Chris Bosh, who of course has a case for the Heat. We have Vince Carter, who of course has a case for the Nets. Who I picked not Bosh for the Heat, but you did not. And neither of us picked Carter for the Nets, so he's available. Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan, and maybe Jose Calderon, just because he's up there in the leaderboards. Although I'm not really that great on putting him on there.
All right, well, since I outlawed Chris Bosh from the Miami Heat team, I will then add him now to the Raptors. I went Vince Carter, and then I think I'm going to bump Kyle Lowry off and go Vince Carter, DeMar DeRozan, and Chris Bosh. But it's very interesting. Yeah, I don't really like that either. But this team's kind of a mess here. It's kind of interesting, and I did notice when we were looking at the research. Does it surprise you that the top 6 all-time win shares Raptors are all still active players?
Well, I mean, given that they've only been around for 20 years, I guess it's not super surprising, but yeah, it is.
It's helped by the fact that Vince Carter's 41 years old and just won't leave, right, which is the greatest story in NBA history. Is Vince Carter workman-like? If I had told you in 2003, who's going to stick with the league forever because he's just a hard worker that accepts his role and just wants to do the things that the team wants to do, it's Vince Carter. You would probably say you were nuts, but yes, in 2017, Vince Carter is still an active player and still a good part of some teams too. So yeah, that's quite interesting there. But yeah, I'm going to go Vince Carter, DeRozan, and Chris Bosh. But that's a really weird one. I had Lowry on there, but then I bumped him for Chris Bosh because I forgot to put Shaq on a team. So
I'm going to go with Carter, Lowry, and DeRozan. I would definitely put Bosh on here if he hadn't been on my Heat team. I guess I should have. I wasn't really thinking about that when I stuck him on the Heat. But yeah, I think I'm okay with the Heat have. Well, let's see, who would the Heat get if I put Bosh here? Who could because they won't have Shaq because I put him, or no, they will have Shaq. Where did the Heat go? Heat. This is fun. This is good podcasting right here. Let's see. So, all right, you know what? I'm going to put Tim Hardaway on the Heat along with Wade and Shaq, and then I'm going to go ahead and put Bosh on the Raptors. But I'm going to bump DeRozan off. I'm going to put Carter, Lowry, and Bosh. So it is so decreed. I think Lowry's just been a little bit more of an impactful player, even though DeRozan's been there played longer. So next we have the Memphis Vancouver Grizzlies, and they've had some, obviously their great success has been over the past 5, 6, 7 years, and the two key players I think in that are Marc Gasol and Mike Conley, who are up there in the leaderboards, or two of the really elite players who have played for the franchise. The other we'll get to in a moment, but I think they've been really the driving force for that success. Zach Randolph's obviously up there as well in terms of modern impact. Guy in the 2000s for their initial run of a couple good years. Pau Gasol might be the best individual player that they've had. Definitely between Mark and Pau, it's an interesting discussion. And then the only other guy who I think really has kind of been a effective, a real strong, maybe not quite franchise player, but at least all-star caliber player is Sharif Abdur-Rahim for Vancouver. But those were so bad, and I'm not really putting a lot of stock into that. But he's the only other guy who I would say you might consider.
Yeah, I went with Marc Gasol, Paul Gasol, and Zach Randolph, but yeah, not a lot of there. Mike Conley, I probably should have put Mike Conley in there, but for whatever reason, the Gasols had me. For some reason, I just like the combo of the Gasols in there with Zach Randolph. But yeah, Mike Conley, you can make a legit case, but it's such a young franchise that there's a lot of guys I think you can that don't. There's really not enough head and shoulders, like no doubters in my mind. But yeah, I went with the Gasols and Randolph.
Yeah, I would go with the Gasols, but I would go with Conley over Randolph.
Yeah, and I think that's fair.
Yeah, so nice to get a guard there. Although with the way the Gasols can pass, maybe although you probably, I don't know how well they're going to.
I just want Z-Ball. I want Z-Ball taking the ball up every time.
Yeah, so that'd be fun. Work. That's true. That's a good point. So, next, the Pelicans. Obviously, we've Anthony Davis, who is, I think, a for sure thing, even though relatively young in his career, just has had incredible impact. And the Pelicans, we're considering their history since. We're considering their history since 2003. So not a lot of great choices there. Chris Paul, you definitely could have picked him for this franchise over the Clippers, but I think he's going to be better known for his Clippers years than he was for these years, even though he was probably a better player during this time. David West is really good for a while. It's kind of like Baron Davis. We talked about wing with the Hornets, but Baron Davis wasn't that good, honestly. I mean, he was good, but not really that great. So yeah, this is tough. Ryan Anderson, maybe DeMarcus Cousins once he's got a few years if he stays with the Pelicans. This one's really
this is bad. Move over Buck Williams because I have a worse third member. I got Anthony Davis, David West, and PJ Brown. Let's go, PJ Brown. Let's do this. Yeah, there's no good choices. It's impossible. But yeah, let's go PJ Brown there. So there.
Yeah. Maybe in retrospect, we should have switched around some Clippers and put Chris Paul on this team.
Right, exactly.
But it's too late for that. So we're just gonna go with that. Your choices are fine. We'll go with that. And the Thunder. I think the for sure choice is obviously Kevin Durant, the traitor, Russell Westbrook, and then we've got Serge Ibaka, James Harden. We've already picked for the Rockets, so that's not happening. And Steven Adams, I think, are pretty much the only other choices that would kind of make any sense.
Yeah, I went Durant, Westbrook, and Serge. So there.
Yeah. I think Adams could be there, but I don't think he's quite there yet. I would agree with Serge over Adams. So, and so we're gonna do one more. We're going to do an ABA Big Three that since the ABA teams didn't get represented, the ones that don't exist anymore. I thought it'd be nice to pick a few of the top key players. I think our for sure, since he didn't make it to the Bulls for 8th of us, would be Artis Gilmore. Was an incredible player for the Colonels in the ABA. Dan Issel would be a consideration, but we already got him for the Nuggets. And then guys like Connie Hawkins, Spencer Haywood, Rick Barry, who we picked for the Warriors, but if we hadn't, could be on this team. Billy Cunningham and Zemo Beatty. Cunningham was an MVP. Haywood was an MVP. Hawkins was an MVP. They all were pretty short-lived in the ABA. Barry played for a little bit longer there. Beatty obviously helped lead the Utah Stars to a championship. So, and there's other guys too. Those were kind of the key ones that I picked, but we could kind of pick any of the guys in ABA history. So, and I'm guessing you might be throwing Moses Malone on this team.
Yeah, exactly. So I held him, but so I'm gonna do Moses, Spencer Hayward, and Artis Gilmore here. So that's why I was saving Moses for this. I wasn't sure if we were gonna be eligible to reuse guys for this ABA team, so I was saving Moses here. But yeah, Moses Malone, Spencer Hayward, and Artis Gilmore were the three that I picked.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna go with Gilmore. I'm gonna go with Connie Hawkins, and then for my third, I think I'm gonna go with Cunningham over Spencer Haywood, but it's extremely close. I think Cunningham might be a better fit for what they want to do, and I think it might be a more interesting team. Although Haywood's a really good player too, so you go either way. I'm gonna go with Billy C. So. All right, well, I think we got through it. We got some big three, yeah. So I believe we got 32 teams here, so we could have a little tournament, have some fun. Or no, I think we might have 33 because we split the Thunder and Sonics, and we split the the Hornets and Pelicans we would have split, but we split that'd be 32 then. That'd be 31 plus the ABA team. So 32 teams. We have a little tournament here. See who could come out on top. Maybe we'll book that in the future. You never know.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, let's book it.
All right.
It's the wrestling coming out of us. So
yes,
good.
Indeed. All right, Rich, anything else to say, or have we exhausted ourselves?
I am done. I have talked enough.
All right, yeah. I had 7 job interviews today, so it's been a long day for me, a lot of talking for me today. So yeah, hope everyone enjoyed the show. Hope everyone enjoyed the shows that we are able to put out. Obviously, we're on a reduced schedule right now, at least for the next month or so. Hopefully, we'll be back to more regular schedule soon, but enjoy the shows. We gave you an extra long one this time, so hopefully that will tie people over for a little bit. But thanks, everyone, for checking us out. You can find us at thestepback at fansided.com. You can also find us on Twitter and Facebook at OverandBackNBA. You could leave us a review on subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes. We would greatly appreciate your support during these tough times. So thanks, everyone, for listening. We'll be back again soon.